Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. He announced £13.4 billion in additional defence spending yesterday. This morning, his Defence Secretary said the uplift is only £6 billion, which is the correct figure. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister.
The largest sustained increase since the Cold War. That's what Starmer called his defence spending plan. But today, at PMQs, that claim completely unravelled when his own cabinet couldn't agree on the numbers. While Starmer insisted on £13.4 billion, his Defence Secretary stated the uplift is only £6 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's a £7.4 billion discrepancy on national security funding during global instability. The question now, which figure is the lie? The numbers game played by politicians isn't new, but what we witnessed during Prime Minister's questions has taken political misdirection to remarkable heights. When Keir Starmer stood confidently at the dispatch box, repeating his £13.4 billion defence spending increase, alarm bells should have rung for every voter concerned with national security. What makes this particularly troubling is the glaring contradiction from within Starmer's own cabinet. His Defence Secretary had already gone on record stating the actual uplift amounts to just £6 billion, less than half the figure the Prime Minister repeatedly brandished during heated exchanges. This isn't a minor accounting discrepancy.
Look, if you take the numbers for this financial year, and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase.
Speaker, that wasn't very clear. How is it that the Defence Secretary says £6 billion and he says £13.4 billion?
That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
We're talking about a £7.4 billion gap that would fund multiple major defence programs. Watch the footage again and notice Starmer's body language when directly confronted with this contradiction. The characteristic stiffening of his posture, the slight narrowing of his eyes, and that peculiar tilt of the head that signals he's preparing a rhetorical sidestep rather than a straightforward answer. This isn't the body language of a leader confidently defending accurate figures. It's the physical manifestation of someone buying time to construct a carefully worded evasion. And evade he did. Starmer's repeated retreat to the phrase, "If you take the financial year this year, and then you take the financial year for 2027 to 2028, serves as a masterclass in political obfuscation.
If you take the financial year this year, and then you take the financial year for 2027-28, the difference between the two is £13.4 billion.
The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
That's the same answer. If you ask again, I'll give the same answer again.
By deliberately comparing different time periods, he creates the illusion of a larger investment without actually addressing the core discrepancy between his claims and those of his Defence Secretary. When pressed further, notice how quickly Starmer shifts from defence to offence, accusing the opposition of asking the same question over and over again. This rhetorical technique serves a dual purpose. It portrays his questioners as obtuse, while simultaneously relieving him of any obligation to reconcile the contradictory figures his own government has put forward. It's a clever deflection tactic, but one that leaves the £7.4 billion question unanswered. Perhaps most damning is the assessment from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, hardly a partisan organization, which bluntly characterized the government as playing silly games with numbers. This isn't merely about creative accounting. It's about fundamentally misleading the public on matters of national security at a time of increasing global instability. The true concern extends beyond this single discrepancy. If the government is willing to inflate defence spending figures by over £7 billion in public statements, what other financial commitments might be hidden or misrepresented within these conflated numbers? The lack of transparency raises serious questions about the actual distribution of these funds and whether they will genuinely enhance Britain's defence capabilities. Most revealing was Starmer's response, or lack thereof.
Mr. Speaker, someone needs to tell the Prime Minister that being patronising is not a substitute. It's not a substitute for answering questions. It's not a substitute. He hasn't answered.
Security guarantees in Ukraine, and that is extremely important, because the worst of all outcomes, if there's to be a cessation of hostilities, is that it is a short break rather than sustained and lasting peace.
Mr. Speaker, this is an endeavour that we want to support him in, but we need to know exactly what it is we're supporting. We need clarity and transparency over the money. We also need to know where this money is going.
When questioned about whether the AUKUS submarine deal would be funded from this defence uplift, his refusal to provide a clear answer suggests the real increase in actual defence capability may be even less than the £6 billion his Defence Secretary acknowledged. If significant portions of even that reduced figure are already earmarked for existing international commitments, the net benefit to our armed forces could be marginal at best. This pattern of evasion raises profound concerns about how the government approaches national security funding decisions. In an era where potential adversaries are rapidly expanding their military capabilities, the British public deserves clarity on exactly how much is being invested in our defence infrastructure, not carefully constructed soundbites designed to create an impression of robust spending that doesn't align with the ministry's own internal figures. The defence spending discrepancy represents more than an accounting issue. It reflects a concerning approach to governance where political messaging takes precedence over factual accuracy. When cabinet ministers can't agree on the size of a central budget allocation, it suggests either a breakdown in internal communication or a deliberate strategy to present different narratives to different audiences. This pattern of numerical manipulation doesn't just represent a statistical disagreement, it strikes at the heart of our democratic principles. What we're witnessing goes beyond political gamesmanship. It's a calculated strategy to obscure the truth about national security funding at a time when clarity is paramount. Security experts have warned that this type of misrepresentation creates a dangerous deficit of public trust. When citizens can't rely on straightforward answers about defense spending, it undermines the very foundations of national security, particularly as geopolitical tensions intensify around the globe. Moving forward, we must demand greater transparency. When officials present funding figures, scrutinize which financial years they're comparing. Look for consistency between cabinet ministers. And most importantly, reject the patronizing deflections that have become all too common when legitimate questions arise about how our tax money is being allocated. Our national security deserves better than accounting tricks and verbal gymnastics.